As you may know, the concept of trend following has been around for a long time, and a few books has been written on the topic over the years. But it wasn't until a few years back where the quote-unquote Bible on trend following was written by Kathryn Kaminski and Alex Greyserman. Today I want to share some really interesting lessons that Kathryn Kaminski took away from her long journey to publishing this book. A few behind-the-scenes insights and some of the key things that she and Alex discovered along the way. So sit back and relax and enjoy these unique takeaways from my conversation with Kathryn. And if you would like to listen to the full conversation, and I hope you do, just go to toptradersunplugged.com/41 and also /42.
If I go back for just a second, this
Sure.
concept of trend following is something that has been passed on throughout the ages. I think we start our book by saying, find a trend and follow it is a common adage that has been passed on throughout the centuries. And this is quite, sort of one of the points that we begin the book with, is that people have been using and following the herd, following the crowd for as long as anybody ever has imagined. And essentially trend following is simply following a trend that you may see.
Sure.
And if you look across history, this particular approach, if done the right way, can actually be very stable over time. And that's what we see in the beginning of the book, is there's an 800-year analysis. And
Right.
I mean, granted that, any of these analyses are not, sort of empirically sort of hardcore research, but they give us some perspective on sort of, wait a minute, is this something that I could have done throughout the ages? And I think if you take that and you think about what trend following is about following something that looks like it's going up and cutting your losses when you think it's not. And so it's very simple. I mean, granted, the way that we do it today is much more sophisticated and much more systematic and sophisticated. But I mean, the concept is really simple.
Sure. And I think, in a sense, that's a little bit, it's quite interesting to me, because I think sometimes managers overcomplicate the message of trend following because they want to sound like what they do is really sophisticated. But in reality, it's really not that hard.
Definitely not. And I mean, I think I spent a lot of my research time thinking about stop loss. And why do people use stopping rules, for example? And there's a lot of behavioral reasons for this. And trend following is exactly the same. I mean, you create some systematic rules to help you control your behavior, to help you to make decisions. And so for something like stop loss as an example, we use a stop loss because we know that we may not be able to get ourselves to stop the loss without making the decision a priori. And trend following strategies, and the concept of trend following, is about creating a simple set of rules, a simple heuristic for how do you actually profit from moves up or down, and if they exist, how do you sort of handle them? Because, so when we start our book, actually, one of the interesting graphs, the first graph that we have is actually performance of the S&P 500 for the last 20 odd years, and then performance of trend following. And if you just look at that graph, there clearly are trends, long trends that exist in history in different markets. So if we sort of have that approach, there may be some ways to sort of develop heuristics to help us to handle the ups and the downs over time.
I want to try and stay with the theme of the history and trend following and just ask you, how did you find sort of evidence of trend following taking place going back so many years? Because we obviously, many of us remember the last 5, 10, 20 years, but once you sort of get past that and, for most investors, we're not in the markets 50 years ago or 100 years ago. How did you observe or identify signs of trend following back then?
Well, I mean, I think in the beginning of our book starts with an 800-year analysis. And that data, I mean, you have to think of it as an abstraction.
Right.
Imagine that, 200 years ago that you're sitting there looking at prices for rice or, not oil, but not 200 years ago. So you're looking at prices for lean hogs.
Sure.
I mean, there's clearly maybe dealers that are selling these particular prices. So you have to abstract that the historical record that we have of those prices represents sort of an aggregate view of how those markets behaved over history. If you see it that way, then you sort of take this abstraction with the idea that what if I was the type of person that just said, if I see things are going up in the last 12 months, I buy.
Yeah.
If I see things are going down, I sell if I can.
Sure.
And do that simple thought analysis, not complicated rules, but basically just looking at history, 12 months, buy or sell. And you do that over history, equal weighted, and then we examine how that performs. And the performance is relatively stable and somewhat, intuitive to me, as was what you see with modern day trend following. But modern day trend following is obviously much more sophisticated, but the concept is exactly the same.
Yeah. I think also you, am I right in saying that you found actually some quotes from some, I don't know what it was it a politician or something like that, who actually used words that I think we use nowadays in describing trend following?
Yes, this quote is from David Ricardo, who was a legendary political economist.
Okay.
And this is sourced from a book called The Great Metropolis in 1838.
Okay.
And he said, cut short your losses and let your profits run on.
Right.
So
sounds very familiar, doesn't it?
It's almost 200 years old, but it's the same concept.
Extraordinary. Before we go into sort of the next topic as such, I want to stay with the theme of history, but in a broader context. We talked about sort of the history of trend following, but I think it's fair to say that trend following, perhaps you could say, is built upon three things: data, which relates to history, then there's some science, and then there's kind of the art. Talk to me about what you think about these three building blocks when you hear them.
Well, I think this is an important concept because in our book, we kind of focused on all three: history, science, and art. And I think one of the things that often we academics tend to forget is that history is very important because history provides, it sort of shapes how we perceive things, and it builds contextual relevance. It gives us contextual relevance for what we do. So we started with history in the book, well knowing that sort of historical analysis is fraught with issues.
Sure.
But we thought that it was important to tell that story. On the other hand, we also focused a lot on how do you create a science, a structure around the art, which then turns into art.
Sure, yeah.
So I think our book, in some sense, is much more about the science. And then we give details in terms of how art can be added to it. So I would say that the science of trend following is understanding how to build a system, what properties are important in building that system,
sure,
what statistical properties to expect of the strategy, how to understand how to combine different components of a trend following system.
Sure.
And I'd say that the art is actually in the application.
Okay.
So if you imagine any sort of trading strategy or any hedge fund strategy in general, the science is simply how they construct their process. But the art is what makes one manager different from another.
That's it for now. And remember that if you want to listen to the full conversation with Kathryn, please go to toptradersunplugged.com/41 and /42. If you enjoy this short, insightful clip from a past episode of the show, then you will love the free book I'm giving away right now. It's called The Many Flavors of Trend Following, and it includes some of my best insights to this, the most dependable and consistent yet often overlooked investment strategy. You can get your free copy at toptradersunplugged.com /book right now to start your own journey today. So again, just go to toptradersunplugged.com /book and make sure to tune back into the podcast or YouTube channel next week for more exciting and engaging conversations. Until next time, take care.